Okay, good morning, everyone. For those of you that I'm yet to meet, I'm Lizzie. I'm co-founder of Kandaba, the private communication tool for families, and I'm hosting the FamTech Summit today. And I'm very lucky to introduce our speaker, Bruce, who I'm going to give a wee intro in a minute. But I just wanted to touch on the fact that we're a community of parents, siblings, cousins, grandparents, and we're all interested just in learning more about family and technology and how they overlap and how they can support and affect each other. So we're really happy that you've dialed in and joined us today. So to get to Bruce, thank you so much for being with me today. Bruce,
thanks for having me.
You're welcome. Bruce is co-founder of FutureX, based also here in Edinburgh. And they're all about creating unique events and programs and partnerships, really hoping to inspire that new age of purpose-driven business. And Bruce, I know that's why we know each other so well, because we've had the chance to work together as Kandaba's also a social impact business. So Bruce, I'm just going to pass over to you, and I'd love to hear more about what was your journey to FutureX and what did that look like for you?
Sure. So thanks so much for having me. The kind of mission that we're on now is to actually redefine what the role of business is. And I believe that, really passionately because of the journey that we've been on, but also looking at the incredible role that business and entrepreneurship can play in everyone's lives, for me, is so powerful. And I think that the ability to shape our businesses and communities in a way that uplifts everyone and supports everyone really ought to be the purpose of business, versus this kind of sometimes perceived system where all the value is sucked out from the top. Everyone works really, really hard at the bottom to feed that, and it's kind of extracted from the top. And so the journey for me was I got started when I was in high school. So I took part in a kind of school project. Young Enterprise Scotland was the kind of initiative. And we got the opportunity to try a bunch of things. And we hit on this idea eventually that we were going to run an entrepreneurship event, which was a big deal to us. I hadn't had any exposure to what entrepreneurship events looked like whatsoever. So we just kind of created it in our own image. And it was that experience for me of having to reach out to people and sell tickets and work out how we were going to make money from it, but also how we were going to provide value, managing, big business names and the kind of egos that sometimes go along with that. It was a kind of whirlwind experience. And although I didn't ever think this was going to turn into a company that it was going to become my life, I guess you take every step at a time and you think, actually, maybe this could be something. And so when I moved to Edinburgh and to start university, I thought I'm going to do more of this to see if there is an opportunity here. And actually, critically, at that moment, we were constantly being told that there were no jobs available for people. And so I was like, okay, well, if I don't want to leave university and still have no job, so I'll need to do something else to kind of provide a safety net. I thought if I ran these events, that would at least introduce me to a bunch of people that could help me in the future. As it transpired, it turned out there was a real need for what we wanted to do. A lot of the conferences at the time were, people would speak for an hour at a time. There was a very kind of stereotype image of business on the stage being represented. It tended to be older people, they tended to be all white, and they tended to be telling a fairly consistent story. And what we want to do is, let's create diversity of age, experience, background, gender, ethnicity, all these things that, make up such a vibrant community and ecosystem. And that led me to inviting someone to come over from the US to speak. And then as these things happen, they then invited me over to the US to go visit them. And we ended up having these, all these meetings where I had the opportunity to essentially go to Silicon Valley and meet some absolute mega companies and founders and executives. And it all happened because of this one person who said, you should come over here. And eventually we ended up saying, the company We Are the Future has really got an opportunity here. and we started running programs to take companies from Scotland and the UK over to Silicon Valley to expose them to that whole world. And that was just a snowball effect. Apparently that was really needed, because we then got invited to run similar types of programs in LA, in New York, in Chicago, in Abu Dhabi, in China. And for about 5 years, I spent most of my time running these conferences and programs all over the world, having exposure to people from, all these different backgrounds who actually were having a really similar experience no matter where they were in the world. And I thought that was lovely and beautiful, and also a great opportunity to provide more connections and support for everyone. And then 3 years ago, we ended up doing some work with Virgin and Virgin Unite, which is the philanthropic arm of the Virgin Group. They asked if we would run a project for them in Chicago around people, planet, and business for good. And that was the first time that I had really recognized how being purpose-led and values-led was also a really, really smart business commercial decision, as well as just it feels right in the heart. And that set me off on this new journey of being like, this is the opportunity to put purpose at the heart of everything everyone does, and to be much more mission-led. So 2 years ago, we joined forces with another organization called Power of Youth, and we co-founded FutureX on this mission to redefine the role of business. And so now we run some of the biggest events and programs in Scotland. We still have lots of international links into Silicon Valley, into Berlin. And really we believe in supporting purpose-driven, high growth potential entrepreneurs to redefine the role of business.
That's brilliant. That journey that you have now, just with hindsight, being able to see here was the flow, this was the progression. I can imagine during it, it didn't necessarily feel as organized or as structured, or as if you knew what the outcome was eventually going to be, right?
No, I mean, I've told that story a lot of times now, so that's a very nice, well constructed version of that story. I could give the experience of how difficult it was and how challenging it was, and all the setbacks that kind of are interwoven among that kind of 7-year experience.
Yeah, well, I think what's really interesting, what stood out for me is you mentioned a lot about initially network, but then relationships and communication, and actually listening to then understand and how then business for a purpose then kind of came out of that. So talk to me more about that kind of role in terms of relationships, if these were ones that you were forming with people all over the world. How did you kind of support that and cultivate it?
So I think particularly when building these international relationships with people, technology is what enabled me to do that. So that was being able to either find them online and, communicate initially, whether it's over LinkedIn or email, or then get on a phone call with them or get a Skype call. And all these things was able to break down some of the barriers. The thing that was critical, however, was, and I guess the big thing is that a lot of people said to me, kind of like, yeah, really excited to be speaking to this young lad from Scotland, but you need to come and meet us for us to want to really form any kind of bond with you. Because I think there was maybe an idea that they thought, this is never going to happen. I'm speaking to these executives in Hewlett Packard, and they're like, yeah, well, this 19-year-old lad, he wants to do something with us, but will he ever come here? Yeah. And so then when I showed up, I think that was the bit that was kind of like, okay, there is something here. And actually most of the relationship is, a conversation like this, online. And then it's when you meet them, it kind of solidifies it. And that was a major thing for me. I realized that the internet provided access to actually anyone I wanted to get access to. Whether they responded to me was a different story, but I found that I could find literally anyone's email address. There was no one that was outside of my reach. I just became very sophisticated at searching and I could find their information. I learned how to construct a good message, enough of a hook anyway for them to then want to follow up with me. Yeah. And then the key was to go out and meet them in person and show them that I'm a real person. And the biggest thing for me is learning that they're all real people too. And it doesn't matter that they are a mega executive within Apple. You know, they're still a person. They still have hobbies and likes. And I remember chatting to this guy, and and we became, quite good friends actually. And the conversation was actually about the fact that he used to live in Japan and that he was a playwright in LA. And, these are the kind of the conversations that actually built the relationship. And then it was like, okay, how can we support each other? And I think that's how it always has to be. Just think, how do you build a relationship with someone? And then you learn how to help each other.
How important is that, like seeing someone as human rather than as their label or title or what you expect their experience to have been?
Totally.
So tell me a wee bit more, if you were using your skills at quite an early age to get in front of these executives, what was your experience while you were growing up of kind of exposure to technology and how your family dealt with that?
So it's funny because I always remember having a computer in the house, but it was one of those kind of items that no one actually really touched or went near. Maybe we played like Sonic on it, I think. And yeah, it was a thing that was in the spare bedroom, and it wasn't a major influence on us actually when we were really young, I'm talking about. And then I remember my dad got a laptop with work, and that was a kind of like, wow, this is a computer that does stuff. The internet is there. And it was a tiny little laptop, but actually it was a touch screen, like a very, very unintuitive touch screen with a little pen. And that was actually probably the first time that I remember kind of experiencing the internet and being able to go online. And then we often would have, then we eventually had like a family computer. And it was really, my brother and I were the ones that used it the most. And I loved technology. We became totally I particularly became really quite consumed by it. I wanted to find out how everything in the computer worked. Like you want to find out how you can do everything. And it was interesting because at those times, there wasn't any kind of parental controls on the computer. But even if there was, I was utterly convinced that I had much more knowledge of how the computer worked than my parents did.
Yeah.
And I think that's a very interesting thing, is how that's changed from now. And kind of like our generation being much more aware of how the kind of impacts of technology, and you can really kind of see that schools and kind of education establishments have become much more attuned to the challenges and the mega opportunities.
Right.
And so, yeah, I always kind of felt like a kind of like digital native, I suppose. I remember at school we learned to, there was a class on how to touch type, things like that. That it was those kind of basics of how to use a computer. And so it's always been for me a kind of, I guess, a communication platform. I grew up in like the MSN generation. So, everyone was having conversations with each other. You'd go meet your pals in the park, and then you'd come home and you'd speak all night to them on the computer. And so it just became a kind of key component to how you communicate with people. And then smartphones came along. I remember when, getting on the internet on your phone was like an experience you would never bother to try and do. And so it's been such a key component. But interestingly, my parents have always been, at least 10 steps behind. And, they've all got phones, and, they use it, and they've got laptops and computers and all the rest of it. But I don't think it ever became intuitive for them.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So that feeling of like always being ahead of your parents, I'm so interested in what kind of families feel now if they're raising teenagers or tweens. I'm sure some do still feel like that, because although we might be as a generation comfortable using technology in the way that we do, just like you, when you described yourself as a teenager, I'm sure teenagers now are using it in different ways that we've not even thought of, right?
Mm-hmm. Definitely.
And what's your experience with family in terms of what families you have around you, and what experience have you seen them go through in terms of their relationship with technology or the internet?
So interesting, because other members of the family are much more engaged in technology in general. Like I remember my auntie, and she still is, she would always have the latest kind of like gadget. So, when the new iPhone would come out, she would make sure she had that. If the iPad came out, iPod, etc., and not just Apple products actually, but anything really that was there, she wanted to have. Whereas my parents were not really like that. I think they were just much more skeptical towards technology. We're quite a skeptical family. Like we are. We look at the world and we kind of challenge the way things are. And so we're definitely not a family that just goes, it's there, so therefore we ought to just use it blindly or just consume it blindly. And so it's been interesting to see how the kind of extended family, if you like, uses technology, and they're much more engaged on social media, and they are very active on that across all the different platforms. The person who I get Snapchats most from is my auntie.
Really?
She sends me Snapchats on all things she's up to, and I actually love it. I find it quite interesting to see what she's up to, and she sends me things, and sometimes she'll just snap old photos and send them across, and I actually really like that. But again, my parents, they're almost like, I think now it's a stand. It's like I'm going to be anti-social media. They're very much on their phones, and they use they're on things like WhatsApp, and we have like family WhatsApp groups, and we communicate in that way. And that's really, I think that's the nice thing, is that it's the ability to communicate and send photos. Right. But what they're not so interested in is sharing that with the wider world.
Yeah.
And I think what they want is it to be a place where they've never understood why people share their every moment online.
Yeah.
But they absolutely recognize, and sometimes are quite sad, that they're unable to communicate regularly with, say, our cousins who live in the US, or family who are in Australia. Whereas I see that it's their birthday, I see the family photos they post, but they miss out on all that.
Yeah, let's explore that a bit more then. It's really interesting hearing about you describing your family as skeptical, and I guess that's just applying your critical thinking when something new comes up, right? Mm-hmm. And what do you think, I guess, through your experience with your role as well, just the public in general, how much more aware are we of privacy issues, of what is in terms of sharing on WhatsApp versus sharing more publicly, perhaps on Facebook? What do you think the sense is at the moment?
So, I think that we've got to the place where, for many of us, we're very conscious of the privacy concerns. And if I think about what was on social media during my teenage life, I've since gone through to tidy all that up, because you don't think of it at the time, and you definitely are not thinking about the consequences or what that means or the impact of that. All you want to do is share the photo of you out with your pals the next day so that your other pals can see it, and kind of relive that experience. Mm. Now, however, and particularly for me in my role, is that we engage with thousands of people all the time. So our company reach is in the tens of thousands of people for any kind of post that we would share. Our events reach thousands of people. So I'm really conscious that anything I do on social media is directly linked to what is perceived from the company. And I also feel that way because when I see other founders and people I know in companies, you can't help but associate the two. So I'm aware of how that impacts other aspects of my life. So, my social media now is a fairly well thought through kind of sharing. So I share very intentionally.
In terms of your output.
Yes, exactly. And I'm also aware that even on my personal Facebook, even still, I'm just conscious of what I'll share. And that's because I'm aware of how easy that is for anyone to get access to and to form an opinion or thought process. I'm also, frankly speaking, aware that what I post on, say, Facebook will result in the particular types of advertising that I will get. And there's some things I'm like, well, actually, maybe I don't want Facebook to know my political persuasion. They definitely know. I can tell already. But it's that type of thing, is that maybe I don't want to share that aspect of my life with them. And I don't want to be on a particular list here as, I've been boxed as a person who likes X, Y, and Z. Because I actually think that as much as a lot of these algorithms are lauded for being very good, I often think they're not actually an accurate reflection of who I am at all.
Right. What are the dangers of that kind of boxing and categorizing of a person?
And I think that's where we're at with this, this kind of echo chamber, where if I like something, I get more of that same thing. And I'm going, well, actually, I like a spectrum of things, and you constantly show me this much, and that's all I'm getting to see now. And I'm aware that, you know, some of the, it's funny, the people that I see on Facebook, for example, and some of the friends that they show me, I'm like, these people have never been my friends, like close friends, and you're not showing me my close friends. You're showing me these, you know, dots of people, and then naturally, because that's all I'm seeing, you start to read it, and then you get more of it and more of it, and it's going, you're fulfilling you're definitely coordinating my social life, my social media life down this path, whereas actually it should be much broader.
Right, and let's take that even wider. So you're talking about that in terms of it shaping your behavior and interaction with social media. How do you notice that in terms of technology in general, how you manage when you're using it and when it might be using you?
Yeah, so I mean, I didn't realize I was unusual until people started telling me.
You're very, very special.
Thank you. You know, like I turn off my internet all the time. I turn off Wi-Fi. I turn off 4G all the time, and so that I'm inaccessible. And I think that the people who really matter to me, they have my phone number, and if they really want me, they'll phone me or they'll text me. And you know, it's kind of as simple as that. I mean, you know, there's been times when people have messaged me on Facebook about things that are actually really important, and I don't have the Facebook app, so I don't have Messenger. And so I didn't get the message. And people are like, well, that's the reason you need Facebook. And I'm like, well, actually, the bigger lesson here is that everyone has now learned that they can't communicate with me that way. And they'll have to find another way to get the information to me, rather than me saying, in order for me to get this one piece of information, I need to expose myself to this entire platform.
I think so. And you've seen a change in behavior when you employed that tactic.
Yeah, and I think for me, it's about wanting to engage when I want to, and having the ability to switch off when I don't want to, and being completely the master of that. Right. You know, I turn off a lot of push notifications because I actually really resent when these things enter my life without me asking for them. You know, one of the few notifications that I allow is the news, because I'm interested to see what's happening in the world and when it's happening. That's one of the few things that I accept.
Tell me more about those feelings. Resentment is really interesting in terms of when you feel bombarded by a notification. What else did you recognize that you were feeling that was negative that then made you kind of change the way that you were interacting?
So partly I resented that people would use what I would deem as an inappropriate way to get access to me. So, you know, like if someone I didn't know that well, or didn't know at all, suddenly came on my personal Facebook and messaged me, I realize now that that's actually a very normal thing for people to do, and I've actually really kind of softened myself to that, and I'm not so bothered by it. But initially, I was kind of like, "Whoa, invasion here!" Like, you know, you've sent a message that before I deleted the app was like right in my face, and I can't escape the fact that you just got in touch with me. Whereas if you send me an email, or even on LinkedIn or lots of other platforms that I would have to go into, because I also don't get notifications on my home screen about emails or any of that kind of stuff. So I didn't appreciate that. I didn't appreciate someone just suddenly like, I want your attention now. You know, it's something of like, I've got lots of other things to do, and I'm prioritizing, and I'll position where I get in touch with people.
And how did that work in terms of your focus when you turned off the push notifications? How did that feel for kind of just getting headspace for actions?
Oh, great. I mean, I can't imagine how people live their life with all these notifications. I mean, even my partner, she gets notifications constantly, just for all sorts of stuff. And some people get notifications every time someone, you know, likes their post or retweets them and all that kind of stuff. I couldn't possibly imagine my phone ever being off if that was the case.
The they've shown the spike in cortisol, haven't they, when that happens? So even if you don't read a notification, if your phone buzzes, just the adrenaline that's in your system, like, oh my goodness, I have to respond to whatever just happened.
Totally, and I know, and I know that I can get that hit, if you like, by just going on all these platforms independently. And you know, I find myself doing it. You go on and you just look at the notifications on each one. So you open Twitter notifications, open Facebook notifications, and all these platforms have recognized the fact that happens, and that's why we get lots of really useless notifications from them. Facebook constantly telling me things that actually is not really a notification, but it's because they know that will, that will spike some kind of cortisol spike, and I will feel good, and I'll want to stay on the platform for longer. Yeah, I mean, I sound like a cynic, but I actually am not that cynical about technology in general. I just think we should be, like everything else, just consciously engaging with it. I think we should consciously engage with the world.
Yeah, that's what it sounds like the difference is, right? That you're being mindful and that you use the word master, right? So you have the choice when you're engaging and when you're not.
Totally.
How early do you think we're able to kind of explore that with young people? If they're going through that and the notifications that they're experiencing is nothing like, say, when you were 12, 15, 18?
So, I mean, I think that it's much, much more challenging. And I think the social dynamics is different to when I was a teenager. Even things as subtle as when I was a young teenager, we would run out of text messages. You had X amount of text messages, and when you were done, you were done. And it cost you money. You knew every time you sent a text, it was 15p or whatever it cost. Which meant that there was a natural break to the conversations, or you might be a little bit more selective over who you communicate with because you knew there was a limit to it. In this age where it's all unlimited this and unlimited everything, unlimited data, unlimited text, phone calls, etc., it means there is a pressure to be available all the time. And I think in social dynamics, what I've watched from family members and things who are in their teens is that you can't escape it because your social status is kind of in part determined by it.
Right. So it doesn't work to say, well, just don't look at your phone. But
not if you want to remain part of that social kind of hierarchy or group. I'm not sure if you were able to develop a character where I'm just that person who doesn't do it, would you be okay? Quite potentially, but it takes a particular type of person and character and a very strong self-confident character to be able to say, I'm the person that doesn't do that. And so I think realistically speaking, for the vast majority of people, it's how do you adapt to that? I remember hearing this thing that I don't want to call people young people because I am young people, but younger than me people, would send this. They had like a streak on Snapchat where apparently if you send a message every single day to a particular person, you build up a streak with them. But people were getting when they were going on holiday, they were giving their passwords to their friends to ensure that they didn't lose their streak. I mean, that's just alarm bells are just booming in my head when I hear that. And I think that's a kind of symptom of a very unhealthy attitude towards technology and constant communication. And yeah, I don't know how you resolve that, unfortunately. But I think these are the kind of things we need to be looking at, discussing, and trying to detach self-worth from technology engagement.
Right. But I guess that's part of what we're doing here today, isn't it? It's people saying, I want to learn about this. I want to hear other people's experiences. And ultimately, I just want to have a conversation about, first off, how do you feel when something is happening? And is that negative? And if it is negative, then what behavior change could we make? And that's the journey that you went through with, now switching off your internet when you want that time.
Totally. Yeah. And I think it's also one of the things about social media and that has enabled us is to really curate who we want to hear. And I think that has pros and cons to it. On one hand, it's a more pleasant experience for me to unfollow a bunch of people. but I'm also aware that I will, hope, I don't know how many family members are going to listen to this and find out that I have unfollowed them. But you unfollow them because you go, there's lots of information I do want from you, but I don't want to hear you rant about the football,
right?
10 times a week. I want to hear about how your daughter's wedding was. I want to hear about what you got up to on your holidays. I want to hear that stuff, but I do not want to hear you getting into Facebook fights over the football team.
Yeah, and that's what's going to be fascinating, right, about the next stage of innovation is how do we handle and tackle that issue of noise? Because ultimately, like you said, it's not on the other people to know what you want and what you don't want and through what channels. It's up to us to control each of that. Mm-hmm. So I wonder if we're going to be able to get to a stage where we can be really, really granular with the details of our notifications. Mm-hmm. Do you want to decide about these things because these things are important to me, and I don't about this because it just needs to be like water off a duck's back. I don't need to hear about it.
Definitely. I think that's super cool. It'd be much nicer to be able to engage with, and I would engage with a lot more people if I could filter out some of the things, sometimes the opinions that people, I have a lot of quite strong opinions. I feel very socially conscious, and the internet is not always a beacon for progress. And it can be really difficult with people who you know really closely, and you're like, well, I'm not going to never associate with you again, but I really can't abide by reading some of the things that you post. So it would be nice to be able to filter out some of people's political commentary or social commentary on some things. And then on the other hand, there's other people who I absolutely love hearing what they've got to say in terms of politics or society, and I would love to amplify that.
Right. Well, that's really interesting to see where that goes in the next few years, because I think we're getting much more there in terms of working with machine learning or AI. Mm-hmm. Like, how can we actually understand people's use of language and what you want to see and what you don't?
Definitely.
Great. Okay, well, thank you so much for your time. That's been really good fun. Hopefully people have got some value from it. And Bruce, just to finish off, could you let people know how they can get in touch with you when you choose to get their messages, if they want to learn more about FutureX and the events that you guys run?
Yeah, so you can find us online. Our website is futurexinnovation.com. If you want to reach out to me directly, you can find me on LinkedIn. You can drop me an email. Those are the best places and guaranteed the quickest way for me to get back to you.
That's what we love to hear. That's fab. Thanks very much.
Thank you.